pretty estate find was kind of a glam look with some very ugly shades. But in my mind's eye, I could see it has a very, very pretty cottage core. So the first thing to do was get rid of that silver metallic paint. I did chalk paint in a soft ivory and threw away the ugly shades and got to work making sure that this pretty glam piece became a pretty cottage piece. Chalk paint is always going to look kind of manky on that first coat. You just need to get it on and then get on a second coat and let it dry thoroughly. Once it's dry, take your 220 grit sandpaper and start going over the high points where natural wear would occur. So you wouldn't want to sand, say, underneath the underneath of anything. You would want to hit those high points, those arms, that the saucers, anywhere where natural wear would occur. And 220 grit always, because you are not trying to tear off the paint, just abrade it slightly. The chalk paint really makes all that texture pop up and you see all of the relief carving on it, which I knew would happen once we got rid of that shiny exterior paint on it. Then I got some lampshades out of my stash that are these adorable hand crocheted covers. I could see them on there, but I wasn't quite happy with them, so we hot glued on shells and then created a very soft, flirty little skirt, kind of a fringe out of tiny gold glass beads, which will help refract and reflect some light and add just a little bit of a saucy skirt to each of the shades. I love how these turned out. Bird feeders are one of my favorite things to have in a yard or in a garden, and I had found this piece that's a candle holder. I loved the lines of it, but I hated the finish on it. And I thought, how can I turn this into something that would look lovely on a balcony or a patio? I had this bowl that I had gotten for 10 cents at an estate sale, so kind of jumped off from that color palette. Used my ivory chalk paint, 2 coats on the metal. I didn't paint the back of it very much, but I did paint the front and tried to get into the details in the sides. So again, that first coat's always going to look manky. There's nothing you can do about it, but that's your base coat that helps seal. 2 coats, let it dry, hit it with your 220 grit sandpaper. Again, hitting the tops of things, the high points of things, giving it that aged and well-loved look. Once it's completely dry, you want to hit it with a sealer. You can use polyurethane. That's the easiest thing to use. And just spray it so that it's completely sealed. Once it was dry, I used my E6000 glue and took my pretty little green and cream bowl. It fit perfectly, so I didn't have to make any modifications. Glued that in and let that dry for about 4 hours before I finished it. I added this little piece of jade as a center pendant just to dress it up a little bit. And I'm so happy with how this turned out. It's absolutely stunning in the garden. This expanding bookshelf was a gift from a woodworker here in Tucson. I have always loved the concept, but I really wasn't crazy about the finish on the wood at all. It was mimicking the ones that are made in India, and it was made from 3 different kinds of wood. As you can tell, the stain took differently everywhere. So I finally decided to do something with it so I would love it. Enter new paint, Edamame, and it is the softest, most beautiful golden gray green. It went on easily. I was able to take the bookshelf apart and paint all of the pieces except for the inner rails. I didn't want anything that would be sticky on the inner rails. So 2 coats, we'll let that dry overnight. This is just a latex, it's not chalk paint. Hitting it with some 220 grit sandpaper, again, mostly just on those high points and edges. And I didn't go crazy on it. I didn't want it to be too chippy and worn down. I really wanted to enjoy the color for a while. So this is now usable and beautiful, and I don't mind having it as a visible centerpiece with books, and I have some CDs and things like that that I'm putting on it. A little bit of paint and a little bit of color can do wonders. I found these 2 pedestals for candles at a estate sale, but they were so dark you couldn't even really see that they were birds. I had to look at it twice before I knew what it was. So I took some duck egg blue and brushed it over the feathers of the birds, and then went through and wiped off probably about 50% of the paint. What it did was it picked up all the texture of the birds. And then on the fleur-de-lis, I put on a slightly heavier coat. So I wasn't looking so much for texture as I was for shape. And the color really helps define the shape on these. I did let it dry. I only put on 1 coat. With this latex paint, it's not as thick as a chalk paint. It's a little smoother and a little thinner, and it is a water base, so you can wipe off as much as you want or leave on as much as you want. So just wiped off with a wet paper towel and allowed some of the dark to come through, but mostly keeping a pretty even coat across, and you can really see how it picks up those fleur-de-lis. Now once these have candles in them, or fairy lights, they're going to be so pretty out on a patio or on a mantle. These are mason jars that I tucked some battery-operated fairy lights into, and those are perfect for sitting out in the evening, especially if you're in a windy area. This bird bath was probably one of my most favorite projects this week. I had this candle holder, which is wrought iron made in Germany. It is very heavy and very sturdy. I took my Dremel grinder and took off that center spike. I put on 2 coats of the Edamame paint and then put on a coat of sealer so that this would be able to be out in the weather. I then made sure that everything was clean and ready to accept some glue because I found a bowl that I wanted to add as my bird bath. This bowl is an absolutely stunning piece from Italy. It's all hand painted with lemons and leaves, and I found it in the trash. So I thought, I know exactly what this is going to be. I use a silicone that's made for outdoor use, which means it will flex in the heat and the cold, and moisture doesn't bother it. This is it all glued together. This ceramic elephant is vintage. It was in excellent condition, but I felt like maybe just a little bit boring. So, decoupage to the rescue. I have these gorgeous blue and white napkins, and the border print on it kind of reminded me of the fancy elephant saddles. So, this elephant went from boring white to very chinoiserie inspired blue and white, and with a pretty saddle as a centerpiece. While I had these shells out and was working on the lampshades for the chandelier, I thought about a trio of candle holders that I had hit with a pretty aqua paint called Bahama Glass. And I thought, man, this would really kind of up the game here on those lampshades. So with some E6000 to adhere it because they'll work better with the fragile skin on the shells than the hot glue. And some vintage burlap ribbon that's a nice wide ribbon. These pretty but very plain candlestick holders have been transformed into something that would look so pretty on a patio table, maybe like in a luau themed party, something like that, but they just have a really fresh, summery appeal.